Okay, in this final tutorial, I'm going to talk you through the last few questions that go with the population topic. And if you listen closely, we'd help you answer these. But also, by listening to me talk through each of the questions, it will help you revise in general. It will show you how to answer questions. And what I recommend you do is that you note down the question on a piece of paper and what I say, or like I've recommended before, you write the question down on one side of a card, and then you write down the kind of key points that you would use to respond to it. You're not necessarily going to get any of these questions in your exam, but you will get questions that are very similar. Now, the first answer comes from the National 5 2018 past paper, which if you go to the home page, the front page of this website, you'll find, and you can have a look at it. It's a describe question, and it says describe in detail. And it asks us to talk about this gross national income 2015 worldwide. We are not being asked to give any reasons. Remember, it's describe. So it's just say what you see. What's the pattern? Okay. And the trick to this question is giving broad general patterns, but not being so general, like, for example, not just saying in South America, but being specific to areas. So just for quick 4 marks, I would say that on the western side of South America, the countries on the western side generally have gross national income of less than 1.06, whereas on the eastern side, specifically Brazil, but don't worry if you didn't know that was Brazil, you could just say the eastern side, are above 2.175. You could say, in this case, virtually all of Africa, with only a few exceptions, have gross national income of under 1.06. The ones that don't are ones we don't have any data for. You might say in North America, there is a range in the southern area. Now, if you knew this was Mexico, you could say under 1.06. In the central area, you could say, well, you probably know this in the United States, up here and here, is over 4.93. And at the northern part of the North America, which happens to be Canada, is 1.06. Now, at this stage, I've given a lot of points, so you probably don't need to go any further. But depending on where you start on the map, you could say Europe's quite varied, that in the western side of Europe, the gross national income is between 1.06 and 2.74, whereas on the eastern side over here is under 1.06. So you get the idea. The key things to this answer are giving amounts from your key and referring to geographic areas. If there happens to be a whole continent that fits a pattern, that's fine. And if you happen to notice a whole area of the map, like the whole northern part or southern part fits a pattern, then you could talk about the northern or southern hemisphere. But in this case, we don't have that, so we wouldn't be mentioning it. 4 points would be needed because we have 4 marks. Okay, you might want to pause it here. If not, let's have a little look at this next question. So what do we have here? We've got a table that tells us social indicators and economic indicators. And it gives us 3 examples of social indicators and 3 of economic. Okay. Question says, choose one social and one economic indicator of development shown in the table. Explain how your chosen indicator shows the level of development in the country. So you've got to do one of each. So if I just pick number of people per doctor, how does that show us the level of development? Well, if there are more doctors in a country, that would suggest the country is wealthier because it can afford to have more doctors to cover its population, therefore is more developed. It would also suggest the country is not just wealthier but more educated, because in order to have lots of doctors, you would need quite a developed education system to support that. So there's 2 points for 2 of your 4 marks, just about number of people per doctor. If we jump down to this one, percentage of people who can read and write, well, once again, if you pick that one, you could say that if there's a high percentage, that would suggest, firstly, that the country must be very wealthy because it can afford to have a developed schooling system, education system, training lots of doctors and affording to fund lots of schools in order to provide children with free access to education. It would also suggest that the children maybe aren't having to pay for education because a lot of them can read and write and they're obviously going to school for free. It might even suggest that children aren't required to work in these countries because they're able to go to school, and that's why a lot of them can read and write. That's a reason why lots of people in developing countries can't read and write, because often their families have to withdraw from school, either because they're too poor or they can't afford to send them to school. So for each case, I've picked as one of the social indicators, and I've given 2 reasons because it's a 4-mark question. Likewise, if I pick an economic indicator, and I'll talk about 2, Percentage working in agriculture, first of all, if it's very high, it would suggest that the country is having lots of children in order for people to work on the farms. So it tells us a lot about the fertility rates, and that a lot of kids are being born for that reason. It also would tell us that it's probably that farming is not being mechanized, and therefore they need their children to be their workforce. Countries that have a lot of people working in farming tend to be quite poor countries because farming doesn't produce an awful lot of wealth for a country. And therefore, a country that depends on agriculture, where most people work in that industry, tends to be a much poorer country. If we move to the average income per person per year, well, we could first of all say that if in a country where it's very low, it's probably because most people work in farming, because farming doesn't generate much wealth. We could say if it's high, that these countries have probably got a lot of people working in service industries, like banking and insurance and finance and those kind of businesses. And those things generate lots of money for countries. And therefore, you're going to get a higher average income per person. Also, you can then link it to another area of development, which is education, that when there's high average incomes per person, it's probably because the country is very educated, therefore the workers are able to do a wide range of jobs. Okay, so I've given you each point that you would make, and I haven't talked about these last two, although this one here is very similar to this one. And your number of births per woman, you're talking about, why having a lot of children or few children might tell you a lot about country's development. But you would need to make sure you give 2 for each point to get your 4 marks. Okay, moving on to our final past paper question in all these tutorials, which is 2019. We have a question on pyramids. And if you've listened to all the other population tutorials, you should actually be able to answer this. We have Bolivia, we have the Netherlands, and we can see they're 2 very different pyramids. The question is an explain question. Explain the differences between the structure of Bolivia and the Netherlands. Now, because it's explain, we're not wanting to describe. If we were asked to describe, we would say, for example, the 0 to 4 year age group in the Netherlands is much smaller than Bolivia, with only about, 400 and 400, so about 800,000 compared to the Netherlands, which is about 600 and 600, so about 120,000. And that's me just comparing, but I'm not being asked to do this, Bolivia with the Netherlands. I'm being asked to explain. So this is all about birth and death rates. 6 marks. So what I can do is I can give 3 reasons for the difference in the bottom, which is to do with the birth rates, and I can give 3 reasons in the difference in the top of the pyramid, which is to do with life expectancy and death rates. I'll give you a few more reasons for each just to help you revise. So why is the Netherlands got a narrower base than Bolivia? Why are there fewer children being born? Well, this is because in the Netherlands, it's a highly educated country, women are very educated and decide to pursue careers before having children, whereas in Bolivia, large numbers of children are being born because it's still quite an agricultural country and the children are born to work on farms. So I've given you 2 marks worth of points already. Another reason for the huge wide number of births in Bolivia is many women are not aware of how to control the number of children that they have, whereas in the Netherlands they are aware of contraception and how to control that. Fourth reason for there being far fewer children in the Netherlands is that in the Netherlands women don't get married too much later in life and therefore are like to have fewer children. In contrast, in Bolivia they get married much younger, often before they're even 20, and therefore they have far more children. Finally, if we're talking just about birth rates, in Bolivia, it's still quite a religious country, and therefore women are still encouraged to have lots more children, whereas in the Netherlands, it's a far less religious country these days, and therefore it doesn't influence the number of children being born. So I've given you quite a few reasons for why there's a difference in birth rates. If we now talk about death rates, well, we can see the Netherlands has far more people in the older age groups than in Bolivia. One of the reasons is Bolivia doesn't have a medical system to look after people. Well, it does have a medical system, I beg your pardon, but it's more difficult to access because there's fewer hospitals, fewer trained doctors, and you often have to pay for medicine. Whereas the Netherlands has something very similar to the UK, or it probably has something similar to the UK, and people are more likely to get treated. The Netherlands has also probably got a pension system for people so they can retire in old age, whereas in Bolivia they don't, so they have to work for a long time. Many Bolivians will not be vaccinated against diseases when they're younger, and therefore they don't live as long, whereas in the Netherlands they probably are vaccinated. And the final reason is we have care homes for elderly to look after